Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CHGO Bulls Podcast. I am Will Gottlieb, and I'm here with an old friend, some guy, you might call him. His name is Mark Caruso-for-Josh, and Mark, it is so great to have you back. I'm just thrilled to be able to talk with you here on a Friday afternoon, just like no time has passed since our last Friday HQ episode. But before we get into any Bulls basketball related stuff, of course, I want to get your opinions and your thoughts and your criticisms and your hate and all of it. But first, how's it going, man? How are you doing? How is fatherhood part 2? What's going on in your world?
Well, how dare you assume that I'm just going to come here with hate? Why would you assume such a thing? But time has passed, William. It's been 4 months, and I know that because my daughter's 4 months on Monday. And pretty much the last time we podcasted,
I think she was born
4 months
on
ago.
the day of our last podcast.
Yeah, exactly. We finished up, we wrapped up, and she unexpectedly came a few hours later. So, yeah, that's how I know it's been 4 months since we've done this. It's been a long time in some respects, but it feels a little bit odd, and I mean that in the best possible way. Going from doing this weekly with you, William, for several years to then all of a sudden going cold turkey on my goatage fill. So it's been a bit weird coming back to it now, but it is nice to be back with you talking. Well, I guess we're going to be talking about the Chicago Bulls, but let's be clear. Like, the only reason I wanted to do this was just to be able to catch up with you and the loyal listeners again. And the Bulls just happen to be a proxy to do so. So I'm glad we get this chance.
Yeah, we got some old friends in the comments. Fish saying, hi, Mark. Tyson, Mark, we've missed you. We definitely have missed you, but you know, this is a Bulls podcast, and I do want to get your thoughts because they've actually done some things. I think last time we were talking, probably our mentality was like, this is just going to stay the same for the rest of time. Whether the outcome changes, and we'll get into all of that, but whether the outcome changes or not, they have made some moves. And I have not heard, even just talking on the side, I haven't really heard your opinions about any of this stuff. So I figured we could just go through all of the moves of the offseason from Giddey for Caruso to Patrick Williams, Jalen Smith, DeMar DeRozan sign and trade. We can talk about Buzelis and then just some of the bigger picture stuff. How does that sound? Do you want to start with just your thoughts on the Giddey for Caruso deal and what you thought about when you saw that? And obviously, there's some bigger questions with it too, right? Of what could they have gotten if they had done this a little bit sooner? How does the next contract that Giddey signs, how does that factor into things? But let's just start with the deal itself. What were you doing when the deal happened, and what do you think of it just in kind of a vacuum?
Well, I can't remember what I was doing because it wasn't that much of a momentous occasion, both in the trade itself, but also what I was doing. I was probably just sitting around doing jack shit, to be honest. But I can't remember what I was doing. I do remember my initial thoughts, and they were much like everyone else that I've heard talk about this trade, in the sense that everyone knew Caruso was possibly getting dealt, or maybe getting dealt. That was the expectation, or the hope at least, that the Bulls would pivot away from that. I wasn't expecting it to be Josh Giddey, and certainly when the trade went down, I wasn't expecting it to be just Josh Giddey. So I certainly have frustrations around the trade itself, but also how the process around the trade itself. I know Giddey and I both share a same heritage in the terms of
you're a self-hating Australian.
No, I'm just fact-based, mate. Fact-based. I'm not a big Giddey fan, let's say. So I don't like this trade. Let's wrap it up in that way. And maybe taking a step back, William, the title of this podcast episode is, are the Chicago Bulls finally on the right path after off-season moves? I don't think they necessarily are just yet. I think they're headed.
I want to save that part. I want to save that part. Let's just stick to the Giddey Caruso thing, because you mentioned the process of it.
I can't steer the ship anymore, right?
You can chill in the passenger seat. Let's just talk about the value first and foremost. I think obviously I think everybody looking at Twitter saw the initial Woj tweet and said, okay, what picks are associated? I assume you feel the same way. But has that changed at all in time? Was there kind of an immediate, this is a disaster, and now actually I'm warming up to it, or are you still not crazy about the deal?
No, I still think it's stupid. Because I just don't. I think they played themselves in some respects, and I think they lost the negotiation, as AK generally does. Um, and I don't think he's mastered the art of leverage at all in most situations. You could argue maybe in restricted free agency he has, but that's literally the easiest tool available to any executive in basketball to, I guess, win the deal over a player. And it's a lot easier in that sense to win a deal over a player versus winning a deal in a negotiation with another executive, I guess. And the latter is probably more concerning. So yeah, I don't think it was a good deal then. I still don't think it's a good deal now. I don't know how you don't leverage any picks out of the situation. I know a lot of Bulls fans probably don't want to hear me say that because they've moved on. They only want to hear nice and rosy things about Josh Giddey. Fine, I understand that. If that's how you want to fan, you can. But I just wouldn't have gone all in and traded your best asset, which Alex Caruso was, and targeted a player. I would have been targeting picks for a number of different reasons, particularly around the fact that you're going to have to pay Josh Giddey his next deal. And like, that's the element that I don't like. And the whole reason why it was made sense to move on from Alex Caruso at the time the Bulls did was because he had 1 year left on his deal. Didn't really want to be getting in the Alex Caruso business for the next 4 years thereafter. I don't know if you want to be paying Josh Giddey his next deal, which let's see what it looks like. But I'm anticipating it looking quite big and meaty for him, which, good for him. But I don't think you want to be paying him his next deal. And I don't think you want to be centering your entire offense around Josh Giddey, which it kind of feels like they're doing now, given that, when you trade for someone like Giddey, you trade for him to be your starting point guard. You trade for him to be the fulcrum of your offense. And I just don't think he's good enough to be that level of player. That's my take. So maybe you were right in assuming that I would be bringing some hate, William. But
Well, I think when you trade away, obviously Caruso was one of the best players on the team last year, second, third, whatever you want to call it. Like, he was one of the most impactful players, but he still is not like a foundational piece. I think he was overextended in his role as sort of a defensive anchor with this Bulls team. But I also don't know if it's like reasonable to say you could get someone who would become a foundational, like, build around kind of piece. Maybe you could, maybe you couldn't. I think timeline is a big factor here, and that's really where, to me, like, the failings of the trade, the shortcomings in the trade, it was the timeline and not getting more when you could have at the previous trade deadline or before. And then also, as you mentioned, with the signing him to the new deal. I mean, if you look at, like, just in a vacuum, Giddey for Caruso, you're trading, older for younger, you're trading production for upside. And, like, I don't have a problem with that in theory. I think I'm not super high on Giddey in general. I think I'm probably a little bit more, in on him than it seems like a lot of the Bulls fandom is. And that's fine. But, like, at the end of the day, I think a lot of this is going to come down to what does he get on his next deal? And how does that factor into the evaluation here? What do you think is a good number for him? What would you be, like, okay with? A lot of people say the Bulls like to let their guys get to restricted free agency and they play that well. Well, they just signed Patrick Williams ahead of restricted free agency. They did the same thing with Kobe White. I'm not really sure that is their approach anymore. I think they're just trying to, understand and get a guy at a deal that they like. And if that happens to be in restricted free agency, great. If not, let's get it done beforehand. But with Giddey, it's like there's no incentive for him to sign a deal right now, a team-friendly deal right now. That would be the only way where it would, like, make a lot of sense to me, is if you could get, like, a discounted price on a guy that you're buying low on. But my expectation, and this is, like, just a guess, a speculation, is that he's going to want to go out and put up big numbers next year and then sign a big payday in restricted free agency. Assuming that's the timeline of things, where you don't get something done before the start of the season, he goes to restricted free agency, whether it happens before he actually gets there or not. What do you think is a fair number, or a number that you would feel? Because at this point, they have to re-sign him, right? You can't let him go after trading Caruso, your best asset, for him. So what do you think they should re-sign him to, and what do you think he would be expecting, and how big is the delta between those two things?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can let him go if it doesn't make financial sense, but yeah, they're not going to do that, and I don't think this is similar to the Patrick or Kobe situation, or even the Io situation, in the sense that those guys were in house. The Bulls had some leverage over them, particularly Kobe, who, yeah, I would say Kobe they had leverage over, in the sense that he wanted to remain in Chicago. There was a starting spot available potentially for him in Chicago, with Patrick as well. Like, him being their draft pick at that point in time. they had things over them whereby if they came to the table with the right kind of money, they could keep those guys around. With Giddey, he hasn't been in the program. He hasn't been there. You've traded for him. You've made a signal, or very clear signal, that you view this guy as a potential cornerstone to what you're going to be doing for the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it might be. So in that sense, they value him a lot higher than maybe what they had with Kobe and Pat in some respects, because he is a new face. They've invested in him by trading for him. So you kind of feel like they have to pay him from that standpoint. What do I think is fair value? I think it's closer to 20 million from my personal view. But I think based on where things are going with contracts and those sorts of things, we just saw, and I think Emmanuel quickly is the baseline here in the sense, or the facsimile for Giddey and his agent. Like, what's the name? IQ isn't an all-star level point guard. Neither is Giddey at this stage, but they're good point guards. Guys that can sit there and say, they have a lot of upside as players over the next 3 to 5 years as they enter their prime. Quickly got 175, something like that. I think that's kind of the figure that Giddey and his agent are going to be rolling up to the to Arturis and saying, we want a contract very similar to this. Not quite max, but maybe 22% of the cap, something like that. I think that's what they will be arguing for. I'm hoping the Bulls would be arguing for something a little bit less. Maybe they meet in the middle, closer to 25, 27. But I don't think this is going to be a cheap deal. I think Giddey, potentially as soon as next year, might be the highest paid player on this Bulls roster.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. But that's where they have restricted free agency at their disposal. They don't have to overpay. They don't have to jump the gun to overpay. It's different, I think, when you let a guy get another offer. And I've seen that there are teams in the league who at least want to pay him something, more or similar to what you hope to do that. To me, I agree. It's like in the low 20s. Obviously, high teens would be preferable. But I think the difference between Quickly and Giddey is, like, as you mentioned, it's really hard to be the primary guy with the ball in your hands. And I don't think the Bulls are ever going to be a team with this core that they have where it's like one person has 35% usage or more. But if you are stylistically a ball dominant player and you're not good enough to have the ball in your hands, you can't play. And it's a difference between Quickly, who maybe he can't be, a ball dominant star player, but he's a really good secondary, complementary piece. And so, like, the upside maybe is a little bit higher with Giddey if everything hits and he's like a guy that you can give the ball to, but the percent chance of that happening, I think, is a little bit lower. And the downside is much higher because there's more probabilities, there's more outcomes where he does not turn out. So I think that's a really tricky one. And I just don't know. Yeah. Like, is there going to be a situation where, like, he goes out next year and says, look, I average like 17, 7 and 7, pay me $25-30 million. And the Bulls just say yes to that because they feel like they have to. I would like to think that the NBA and the Bulls are smarter at this point than just like paying a guy based on his box score stats.
I mean, maybe, but Pat just got 590 and he barely played this last season and had missed most of year 2. So what would Pat have gotten if he just maybe didn't get hurt and maybe produced at the same level, but was available for all 4 seasons? Does he get 120 or something? I don't know what the number is. But yeah, coming back to the Giddey trade, or Giddey more generally, and just to articulate this a little bit clearer, like, I don't think Josh Giddey is a bad player. I'm not saying he can't contribute anything at all, because he can. I just don't know if you want to be centering your rebuild, assuming it is a rebuild. We can come back to that a little bit later. I don't think he is the primary guy, and I don't think he has the necessary skill set to be an off-ball guy, a role guy. So you need to put him in that primary role, and I just don't think he's good enough to justify that primary role, which is the same thing Bulls fans have been talking about to a lesser extent with DeMar DeRozan. Like, where is this guy taking you as the primary guy? Where is Zach LaVine, Kobe White taking you as a primary guy? I feel like the next 3 to 5 years is going to be the same conversation with Josh Giddey. So that's my main issue with it. I just don't think, I don't like the fact they targeted him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it sets the Bulls on a path that, it's a little bit questionable, a little bit shaky. You mentioned Patrick Williams and his new 5-year, $90 million contract. We're going to get to that next on the other side of this break. But first, I want to tell everyone about a company that was basically built specifically for Matt Peck. It's called Family Farms, and their culinary journey is woven with passion, dedication, and commitment to crafting the finest bacon-wrapped chicken. That's right. Bacon wrapped chicken. That's why it is a Matt Peck special. The bacon wrapped chicken, a timeless delicacy that has tantalized taste buds since 1974. Join them on their flavorful adventure where every bite tells a story of tradition, quality, and the enduring spirit of family farms. And the tradition continues. Now you can find Family Farms bacon wrapped chicken even easier. Look for them at the meat department at your local Woodsman's, Mariano's, and Burkott's. And if you're craving a taste of home without leaving your own, you can go to baconwrappedchicken.com. That's a real website, Matt Peck approved, baconwrappedchicken.com, or click the link for our Amazon storefront, which also includes the legendary Rocky Rococo's Italian sausage, to find out more and when new amazing flavors like the Cajun Nation flavor will become available with an authentic Louisiana bite. So experience the flavors that become a family favorite for generations. Visit your nearest Woodsman's, Mariano's, Burkott's, or on Amazon. Check out baconwrappedchicken.com. And if you want to wash down the bacon wrapped chicken, you can grab yourself a Coors Light because they have the best, most refreshing beverage. And they hosted us, they sponsored us on our trip to Las Vegas for NBA Summer League. And you can best believe we had the Coors Lights flowing at the casino, at the roulette tables, at Stadium Swim to help keep us chill in the Vegas heat. So when the mountains turn blue, you know what to do. It is as cold as the Rockies. It's cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smoother finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light. It is the mountain cold refreshment that is crisp, cool, and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. So to make the most out of the times you choose to chill, choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/CHGO basketball. That's CoorsLight.com/CHGO basketball. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. All right, Mark, I just wanted to thank you and show my appreciation for letting me read both of those ads. I know normally you would, allow me to give you one, but it was really nice of you to let me take both of those. But let's talk about Patrick Williams, your boy, your most favorite son. Another deal that, as I mentioned, came ahead of restricted free agency. 5 years, $90 million, player option on the 5th year, flat $18 million per year. What did you think of that deal with, in terms of like the value itself and then projecting Pat forward? And do you feel like he can and should be part of this young core that the Bulls are building with?
Well, I'll answer the last part first. I don't think they should be thinking about that with anyone. And like they're all good players, all guys that I could see playing a role on a good team. But until you have that primary player, and look, we've spoken about this last time we were doing podcasts 4 or 5 months ago. Like it kind of felt like you could see a path where Kobe, Io, Pat, even Matas now, like where you could see how they could plug in next to the guy or the next two guys and how it could all seamlessly work thereafter. The example that I kept coming back to was Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner in Orlando. Like you needed to get those two guys first, or you could see how Kobe could plug in next to those two players, or how Pat could plug in next to those two players, and how it could all seamlessly work. But it feels like the Bulls, obviously, well, not just feels, the Bulls don't have those two level of guys. So yeah, I don't think you should be thinking about any of these guys and saying, yeah, they're here for the next 3, 5, however many years, because you just know, you don't know, I suppose. Let's see. But in terms of the Pat deal itself, it was fine. It's a decent deal. Having said that, the caveat is like, what's the situation with the foot? We still don't really know a lot, or at least I haven't necessarily read a lot about it. I haven't heard much about it. Now, to be fair, I'm not following things as closely as I once was, but I'm still nervous about those types of injuries, particularly for someone like Pat, who is a power athlete who needs 2 feet to jump and do his thing in that respect. So assuming he can get back and the foot is okay and there's no more, future issues with that foot, or it doesn't lead to other issues, or he doesn't sustain any other injuries, then this deal is completely fine and reasonable, and he will completely fulfill that deal. Even if he doesn't improve at all, $18 million is low-level starter, 6th, 7th man type money going into the new CBA and salary cap environment. So completely fine and reasonable deal, assuming Pat is fine and healthy. Could they have done more in terms of negotiation? Yeah, probably. Do they need to give him the full 5 years? Did they need to go so soon on the deal? Could they held out a little bit longer in the same way the Cavs are doing with Isaac Okoro right now and really used restricted free agency to ramp up against Patrick Williams? Yes, they could have done all those things. But at the same time, I'm also a believer in if you like your guy, if you believe in the player, if you want to not make it an acrimonious situation, then paying the dude $18 million instead of $14 million. Like, is that delta of $4 million really worth any potential strain that you put on relationships? I don't believe so. So I'm not going to ding AK and obviously too much for not using all of their leverage in this situation, but completely fine and reasonable deal. And hopefully Pat's foot is okay and it justifies it.
Yeah, I think the margins element of this are pretty interesting and in line with where we've seen the Bulls shortcomings in the past. Like, yeah, you probably don't like shoot yourself in the foot too much if you give him 18 versus 16. But the flat contract is, the cap is going to go up more than the 8% raises would have. So basically they're giving themselves a worse deal by giving him the flat amount of money. If they would have done annual raises, it would have gone up less than the cap. So yes, by the third, fourth, fifth year of this deal, it's going to be a lower percentage of the cap. But, the fact that you gave him a player option in the fifth year allows him to get off of the value sooner, which means that you've lost potential value there too. So I'm glad it was 5 years. I'm glad they kept him. I'm sure that there was some internal homework done on other teams that may have been interested in giving him an offer sheet for as much or more. I think it's fine to get ahead of that. So no real qualms with me there, but I think, this is something that Doug Tonis has articulated quite well, which is like, every single move that the Bulls make, like none of it is so egregious with the exception of a few things here and there. None of them are like terrible, but when you're losing every single deal by like 15 or 10 or 20%, those things start to add up. And now all of a sudden you have a little bit less space to be able to take in bad contracts for draft picks, or you have a little bit less flexibility to use that full mid-level exception when you actually are trying to be good. So I do think it matters. I don't think it was like the best possible deal, but I think it's a good deal. Another good deal that we can talk about is Jalen Smith, who signed on a 3-year, $27 million contract. What do you think of Jalen Smith, Mark? And do you think that he was the best use of the mid-level exception in this scenario?
Well, I was going to push back. Like, is it a good deal? Are we sure it's a good deal? I don't rate Jalen Smith as a player. Let's be clear on that. I don't know. He's an offensive first 4-5 who's not really a 4, not really a 5. I don't trust his defense at all. Yeah, he had some good shooting numbers last season, but hasn't historically been a shooter. I don't like the fact that he was drafted 10th overall when he was drafted. I don't like the fact that the Suns gave up on him so soon as they did. I don't like the fact that obviously the Pacers let him walk so freely as well. So I don't. There's some maybe not red flags because I don't think he's a good enough player to garner such level of what's the name. But look, I just don't rate Jalen Smith. I don't know if he's someone that I would be giving 3 years, $27 million to. Yeah, okay, I get it. He's a potential fine backup in a scenario where you trade Vooch and this dude is starting for you. Terrible outcome. Now maybe that's a good thing because you're trying to tank and that's fine. But yeah, I'm not a big Jalen Smith fan. I think if you want to talk about overpays, like who was paying Jalen Smith 3 years, $27 million? Like,
well, I think centers were there. They were kind of a commodity. They were one of the few commodities in this draft class, and clearly the Bulls were after young guys who could, potentially shoot and protect the rim. He was really one of the few that has that theoretical skill set. I'm not sure he does either of those at a high enough level to really be worth it. And yeah, to be clear, I'm not like super high on Jalen Smith either. I would have preferred to go get Goga Bitadze at that same price. He actually signed for $325 in Orlando. Mm-hmm. He's at least an elite rim protector and rebounder. That's, something you can at least bank on. Obviously doesn't give you the element of floor spacing, but yeah, I agree. I think it's a fine value in a vacuum. But again, I think to me, what is like concerning about it is that it took other moves off the table. So, and we can get into more of this with regards to the DeMar DeRozan sign and trade. But to me, like it would have been better to not sign Jalen Smith. You're trying to be bad anyway. And to use that space to absorb Harrison Barnes so that you could have been the team that got the first round pick swap in the DeRozan sign and trade. Like, why not open yourself up to that kind of value in that way? Like, I'd much rather have a pick swap in 2031 than 3 years of Jalen Smith and Chris Duarte in 2 seconds. So, again, I don't think that this deal is like horrible in a vacuum. I think it's fine. But when you put it into the larger context of like, what should the Bulls be doing now that they're heading a different direction? How should they be managing their cap space? What kinds of players should they be going after? To me, you want to be thinking about like the 3 to 5 year plan here. And it just doesn't seem like any of these moves really do that when you're signing guys to 3-year deals. Like he could not be around in 3 to 5 years when you're hoping to be good at a certain point. And like, I just would, that to me, that's like not a smart use of their cap space. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree with that element. And coming back to the Giddey point, like if you have to pay him as soon as next season, then that ability to be a team that takes on bad contracts, the year after, that also goes away if you're paying Giddey potentially. Obviously, depending on what else you do with the roster, Zach, Vooch, Lonzo, all those sorts of things. So maybe that's inconsequential in that respect. But yeah, I completely agree with you. In this offseason, there were definitely ways that they could have engineered their cap space or their cap situation to be a little bit more forward thinking in terms of procuring additional assets and going into a rebuilding phase with more assets than what they currently have. I still am a little bit concerned about the rebuild more generally and where that's trending in terms of it feels very Garpaxian in the sense that you're going to the draft with just your own draft pick every single draft, which is probably not ideal. You want to be taking at least 2 first-round picks to a draft for the first maybe 1, 2, 3 years of a rebuild. But it doesn't seem like that's going to be a situation that the Bulls will be embarking on. So I completely agree with your wider point more generally, but the Jalen Smith thing, like, it kind of feels very Javon Carter-ish to me in a lot of ways. Obviously, the context is different in the sense that the Bulls aren't trying to win games like the Bulls were trying to last season or upcoming season. So in that respect, it's a little bit different. But I guess with the Carter comp is obviously not comparing them as players, but Javon Carter had that one outrageous shooting season for the Bucks. We kind of felt like or hoped it would carry over to the Bulls. It didn't.
It's true with Vooch
And then
too
when
in Orlando.
Yeah. But when Carter's shooting didn't transfer, then those other flaws get more magnified. Those flaws which maybe dissipate a little bit if he's making his jumpers. So the point is, like, if Jalen Smith, if last season was an aberration because he was playing in a fast up-tempo offense with Tyrese Halliburton, maybe it's not that at all. Maybe it was just a fluky jump shooting season. Like, if his jumper isn't there, what is he really doing for you? That's the question that I have with Jalen Smith. And 327 was a little bit steep for me. If it was closer to 320, yeah, okay. But anyways, I'm getting in the weeds here. Let's move on.
Well, I think you bring up a good point because
much time.
you bring up a good point though, because Jalen Smith, rookie season, 32.8% from 3. Second season, he's been traded quite a bit here, so I'm trying to cipher this out. 37%. Then next season, last year, 28%. This most previous season, 42.4%. So it really has been all over the place. It would not shock me at all if that was his career high. If that ends up being his career high, even if he plays 10 years in the league, 42.4% on 2.4 attempts per game, getting fed wide open passes from Tyrese Halliburton. That's just going to be hard to replicate. And I understand why you want to do that in theory, but to me, that's a little bit tricky. I do want to talk a little bit more about the DeRozan trade, unless you've got final thoughts on Smith.
No.
I just want to lay it out here and then we can take a break and talk about it after. But my biggest thing with the DeRozan trade is like, yes, it's good you moved on. They clearly, I think, would have liked to bring him back had they been able to offload Zach, and we can talk more about him. But you end up with Duarte, 2 seconds. The Kings get DeRozan. The Spurs get Harrison Barnes and a 2031 swap. Obviously, taking that swap in addition or for the in order to take on Barnes's $19 million contract for this year and next year. So we will get your thoughts more about the Sacramento Kings trade and DeRozan's landing spot and where he is, alongside your thoughts about Matas Buzelis, the Bulls rookie at 11, and potentially if there was somebody you liked or preferred that they would have taken with the 11th pick. But we will talk more about that after this. Would like to tell everybody about our friends at Ray Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram. Make Ray CDJR your #1 draft pick this summer to find the perfect new car for you. This July, shop a wider selection of vehicles at Ray CDJR and score new lower prices across their huge inventory during the Make This the Summer event. For a limited time, lease the new 2024 Jeep Compass Latitude Luxe for only $189 a month, or shop over 125 vehicles priced under $20,000. Let the amazing team at Ray CDJR help you land the perfect vehicle at the perfect price, because Ray's price promise, the numbers you're hearing now, are the same prices you can expect to shop in store and online. That's because Ray's price promise means no price changing, no add-ons, and no hidden fees. Since they prioritize affordability for their customers, hurry into Ray CDJR today and shop one of Chicago's largest inventories. Then drive home with more money in your pocket. So if you are in the market for a new vehicle, then you have to check out our friends, the team at Ray CDJR, Ray Dodge, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram, because they're the only ones we recommend. Visit them today on Route 12 in Fox Lake. For more information, visit Ray CDJR in Fox Lake or raycdjr.com. Serving the community since 1963. Would also like to tell everyone about Indeed. We are driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work, use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. So the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Listeners of the show get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/AllCity. That's Indeed.com/AllCity, ALLCITY. Just go to Indeed.com/AllCity right now to support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/AllCity. Terms apply and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed, you do. All right. You want to go to Buzelis or you want to talk DeRozan? I'll give you a little agency and power in this show. Just for old time's sake.
Thank you. Wow.
So
well, let's continue. Let's start. We started on the DeRozan path, so let's continue walking down that one, eh?
Let's do it. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, okay, you're probably going to lose DeRozan. It's better that you move on from him. It's nice to get a couple of second-round picks, but I think, as is true with many of these deals, like the opportunity cost, if you had a little bit more of a holistic picture of who you are, even just starting from this summer. And I think clearly, if you extend things back to last trade deadline and last offseason, when they absolutely had no excuses but to start making moves, obviously things would have been different. But even if you just focus on the moves that were made this summer, I think they still leave a little bit to be desired because they feel a little fragmented. They feel like they don't really have a complete picture of what they should be doing as a rebuilding team. And I think allowing the best asset to go to the San Antonio Spurs in a 3-team deal in which the Spurs don't get the best player, that's a little concerning if you are a team that's, again, entering a rebuilding phase.
Yes, completely agree. I'm too exhausted to talk about the what ifs about, had they done the DeRozan deal in 22 or 23 or, the countless other examples of when they could have moved DeMar. So I'm looking at this purely from the deal that was done at the time it was done, whilst obviously appreciating the fact that they let it get to this stage contributed to what ultimately became the deal itself. But to your point, which I think is the most pertinent point, is even in this scenario, and this is obviously the theme of the podcast in some respects, like in isolation, the moves are okay, they're fine. You could argue to the nth degree, or the bits on the end, the periphery of the deals are not ideal. But in totality, like, what does it all mean? Like, that's still the concern. That's seemingly a concern with this management team going forward regardless. But on the DeRozan deal, and we touched on it before around the fact that because they had gone out and signed Jalen Smith, but obviously more generally because they have $80 million on their cap sheet committed to Vooch, Levine, and Lonzo, that also limits your ability to take on someone like a Harrison Barnes in a salary dump type move. To get the best asset in a DeMar trade, which was that first round pick swap. So even though I just said that I don't want to lament over past situations, I just did bring up the fact that they have 80 million on their cap sheet of players that they probably don't really want to be on the roster. So in that respects, going into the retool or rebuild, whatever you want to frame it now, their hands were tied in some respects because of all of the errors they've made in years past. And yeah, it is a bit conflicting that you see someone like DeMar go, one of my favorite Bulls that I can remember in a long, long time. I will certainly miss watching DeMar DeRozan play basketball in Chicago. I will be watching a lot of Sacramento Kings basketball. And to know that you didn't necessarily win the trade in that sense, again, coming back to what I mentioned before, like AK seemingly is always out negotiated by someone. The Spurs won this negotiation. They clearly did. And they weren't necessarily even the principals in this deal.
They
was always going to
it.
be the Bulls Kings. Yeah, like that was where the deal was formulated. They needed to find the third team. And somehow that third team is the one that wins the deal. So
And
shout
I've
out
said
to
this
the
before
Spurs.
too. Like the Bulls, if you don't sign Jalen Smith, that keeps that space open. That allows you to take back Harrison Barnes. Now you've removed one of the parties. So let the Kings keep their 2 second round picks and they can just give you an unprotected pick or a lightly protected first. Like I think that would have been a real possibility. But again, it's like this larger issue. And it concerns me heading into a team or an era, a year where you're supposed to be taking a step back, but you're still so focused on adding young talent. Like, is that going to at some point cost you? And I do want to talk more about that. But first, I just want to get your thoughts on Buzelis. Obviously, they draft him 11th overall. He was a guy that was projected top 6, top 7 on most big boards. I don't know how much, if at all, you watch Summer League, but when the Bulls took Buzelis, what were you thinking? Did you want somebody that was taken instead of him? Topic went 12 to OKC. Devin Carter went 13 to the Kings. Bub Carrington 14 to the Wizards. And Khalil Ware went 15 to the Heat. Would any of those guys been preferable to you? Or do you like Buzelis? And what have you thought about watching him in the few Summer League games that he's played?
Yeah, look, because I quit the podcast, I didn't do any really deep analysis on the upcoming draft picks in terms of having any sweeping takes on who I would have preferred at number 11. Certainly, when Buzelis dropped to number 11, my thought wasn't like, oh, why are they taking this guy? It was, this is a good pick. Like, let's be clear on that. Like, I think that was a good and fine and reasonable pick. My only real draft takeaway was connected to the Caruso and Giddey deal in the sense that I would have liked to have had another pick in this draft and had maybe come away with this draft with Buzelis and Devin Carter. Now, maybe that doesn't look so great in hindsight in the sense that Devin Carter is out injured maybe all of this season, but nonetheless, I still like him as a player. I would have preferred to have traded for a pick rather than Giddey, but I'm going over old ground here. But in terms of Buzelis, yeah, I think it's a good, reasonable pick. I think the Bulls are very lucky that he fell at number 11. I think he's someone that profiles and can be better than what his draft positioning was. I think he is someone who can be, I won't say the cornerstone, but maybe a guy on a real team. Let's see what it looks like. He's still very, very raw from what I saw in Summer League. There's still some concerns that I have about his approach, let's say, in the way he goes about it. I like the confidence. I like the aggression. I like the tunnel vision in some respects, but I also want to see him, curb that a little bit. And maybe that's being a little too harsh, given that the dude is 19 going on 20 and has barely played an NBA game just yet. But there's a lot of things to like about Matas. So, I think that is probably the highlight of the offseason thus far. And I don't want to think about a situation where they draft someone else and that player doesn't look anywhere as good as Matas did in Summer League, or doesn't project to be someone who has the potential that he does. So I think the Bulls were very fortunate that for whatever reason he fell. Now, why did he fall? Again, just my opinion. He seems like a guy that doesn't do anything or doesn't project to do anything at an elite level, but will do a lot of things really well. In the same way, I feel very similar about Buzelis as a draft pick as I did Patrick Williams and Wendell Carter. Let me sum it up in that sense, that I feel very confident that his baseline at a minimum is he's going to be a very good role player. Does he have that star equity? Let's see. I don't think so. I don't think he necessarily has the skill set that projects like that. And maybe in this type of draft where you don't have that top line talent, maybe you take a swing on anyone that does project to have that elite talent. And maybe that's why he fell. I don't know. I'm speculating. But to get him at 11, I think is a good value. So that's probably the highlight of the Bulls offseason, to be honest.
Yeah, I've liked a lot of what we've seen from Matas, and I think when it got to 11 and he was on the board, it would have been hard for me to take someone else. The one thing
Mm,
that I may have done differently with this is if you don't make that trade for Giddey, if you
mhm,
hang on to Caruso or you trade him for picks or something, and you let
yeah,
the draft play out, and you have the choice between Matas and Topic, I may have gone Topic there, understanding that he's going to be out for this full season, which is okay because you're trying to be bad. Then you
mhm,
cash in Caruso on maybe 13, and you can get Devin Carter or some other bundle of picks. I just think that by trading for Giddey when they did, it kind of forced their hand into building around a certain player, a certain type of player with certain flaws. And
mhm,
I think I would have preferred that they had kind of let the door open to be a little bit more creative with team building rather than continuing to sign or trade or acquire guys that have specific flaws that you need to build around. And I find that that's kind of what the Bulls are building right now, just because Giddey is a flawed player, and we've talked about it, and I don't want to harp too much on it, but um, at the same point, like once Buzelis was there and you knew Topic was going to be out for the year, it would have been hard to pass on that guy. Obviously, like a guy that you can really sell to the fans as being from the Chicago area, um, a guy who was projected at one point to be the number one pick. I don't hate it, but I do think that there was an alternate pathway where they gave themselves a little bit more flexibility and allowed
mhm,
themselves to be a little bit worse. And that's where I want to take this next, which is just the general direction. Obviously, the Bulls are now turning a new page on their team. They've got a young core of players: Kobe White, Audisumu, Patrick Williams, Josh Giddey, Buzelis, Jalen Smith, Dalen Terry, Julian Phillips. A decent young core of guys that I think we both like, but don't view as being like the number one player on a championship team. That's the hardest
mhm,
thing to do in basketball. But at the same time, that's the most important thing to find in basketball. That is the job
mhm.
of the general manager and the president of basketball operations to find that guy, because until you have that guy, you're not competing for titles, period. And so it's just very difficult to find a top 10 player. The way that you do that is in the draft. The way that the Bulls stay in the draft is by keeping their pick next year, which is top 10 protected. What's kind of just your general thoughts about one, the importance of keeping this pick? I assume we're on the same page about that one. But two, do you think the Bulls are going to be able to keep this pick? Right now, the sports books have them pegged around 29 and a half, 30 and a half wins, eighth worst team in the league. But they're going to be right on the fringes of the play-in tournament. Do you think that they're at risk of that? And just how much of a priority should they be placing? I guess the last few days, Dave, Matt, and I have been discussing this. Is like, how important is keeping that pick, and how should they prioritize doing that? How should they approach doing that?
Well, first, I just want to say I don't think people have actually noticed or missed me at all on this podcast because I agree with 99.7% of things you say. So, in a lot of respect, I'm just the worst version of Will Gottlieb. And coming off that point, I completely agree with your position on this particular issue, but more generally, like the absolute focus has to be you need to keep that pick. Like that is the priority first. You have to keep that pick. Do anything you can to keep that pick. And assuming you do keep that pick, then double down on that and do everything you can to make sure you get yourself into that bottom three where you give yourself the best chance to have the best chance at Cooper Flag. Anyone else suggesting otherwise, I'm sorry, but you are wrong. That is the priority. There is no other applicable answer. You may have an answer, but it's wrong. The right answer is tank your ass off. This is the time to do it. Do it in 2025. If you're really bold, do it again in 2026. Get those two franchise pillars, go from there, and you've got a real team thereafter. Like that's how you fix this thing. There's a real path for the Bulls to fix this thing. And I know I've been a bit doom and gloom on here. Surprise, surprise. But there is an optimistic path here for the Bulls if they really, truly commit to something. They do have that path, but I'm still pessimistic as to whether they actually want to go down that path and do the right thing and take that hit for a 2 to 3 year period and do the right thing from a tanking perspective. I don't know if they're actually going to do that, but there is a path. There is a very clear vision where they can do these things. I just question it, but that needs to be the primary goal for the 2025 season. And this is why I'm not really enthused about what the Bulls are currently doing because they haven't necessarily committed to a full rebuild just yet, in my eyes. And we can expand on that in a little bit if you want. But that needs to be the goal of the 2025 season. Whether you get Cooper Flag or not, or whoever else, like, yeah, there's a lottery element to it all. There's a risk element to it all. But you need to commit to that. And I think based on how things are currently situated, my guess would be that the Bulls are retooling, but they're not rebuilding. And I'm concerned that they are going to be not bad enough to get into that top 5, maybe hovering around that dreaded number 7 as they continually are. Like, we all relive. We don't want to relive what happened in 2017 after the Butler deal, where you landed 7th, you started a rebuild, you're picking 7th year on year. You're not going into the draft with additional assets. You're just taking your own draft pick to the draft, and you pick good players. Lowry obviously became a star, but you pick good players, and then you're left in a situation where you're back in the middle again. Like, I don't want to see the Bulls headed down that path again, and it kind of feels like, despite there being an opportunity for a real way out of here, if they actually commit to a rebuild and tank, do it properly, I'm still worried that they're going to redo what they did in 2017 through 2019 again. And are you back in the same situation whereby Kobe is the new Levine? Everyone loves Kobe right now, but are they going to love Kobe in 3 to 4 seasons' time if he signs a new big fat deal and is the primary guy? Are people going to love Matas in 3 to 4 years' time? I mean, everyone loved Patrick Williams in year 1, year 2, but we all saw how that played out. Like, how are we going to view Buzelis in 3 to 4 years' time if he's not in the right role and doesn't develop in the right role? Like, they're my concerns. And I'm rambling here, William, but I do think there is some light at the end of the tunnel, but it requires the Bulls to commit to it. And I don't have the full sense yet that they have they're prepared to do that. I don't believe they are.
Yeah, I'm totally in alignment with you. I think like they've given themselves, if you like think about a spectrum of 100 possibilities, right? They have probably opened up a few more doors where they end up as a title team down the line. But they haven't opened it all the way to where there's 50 different avenues. They've opened it from where there was 5 to now there's 25. And that's a lot better, right? You've given yourself 25% chance instead of a 5% chance. That's improvement, but it's still not as much as you could possibly open that door for yourself. And I am concerned about that too. You brought up, prioritizing keeping that pick and doing anything you can to keep that pick. Let me pose you an interesting question. I don't know if Zach is going to be the difference between, the Bulls finishing as the 11th worst team and giving their pick up versus the 6th worst team, 7th worst team, and keeping their pick. But if you could attach a pick to Zach in order to secure, maybe not secure, but in order to move your probabilities from 11 down to 6, would you do it? And because I think you're still in the situation now where you're trying to rebuild, you're trying to retool around your young players, but you still have Zach. You can't move him. And they don't want to give up a pick to do it, but is it worth it to you in that sense if you frame it as part of doing whatever you can to keep the value of what will be a better and more important pick, right? Like the value of the Blazers pick and maybe a future lottery protected first, not as high a value as keeping your pick in the top 10 this year. If trading those things to move off of Zach opens up keeping the top 10 pick this year, is that something you would entertain, or are you in the do not trade future picks for Zach under any circumstances camp?
I think any absolutes like that, where people say you cannot trade a future first round pick for Zach, I don't believe in absolutes like that. I think that's silly thinking. I think you have to have every possible option on the table, and you have to debate the merits of that. Now, to that point, what future first round pick are we talking about? Is it 2025, 2026? Then no, because they're the prize draft picks that you are prioritizing your rebuild around. And particularly for the Bulls, who don't have additional assets coming in from other teams in those drafts, that puts even more weight on your own respective 25 and 26 draft picks. Are we talking about something like what we just saw in the DeRozan deal, where maybe you're giving up a pick swap in 2020, in 2030 or 2031, something like that to offload Zach LaVine? Then that's a very different scenario to what's trading a 2025 draft pick as an example. What are the protections? These are the sorts of things that people need to be discussing and at least having a debate over, the merits over, rather than just putting up a wall and saying, no, you can't trade any first round picks for Zach LaVine. Because I do think there is a real opportunity cost in a number of different ways in having Zach LaVine on this roster, and to a lesser extent, Nikola Vucevic. I mentioned it before, but like the title of this podcast is, are the Chicago Bulls finally on the right path after off-season moves? I don't know if they're fully on that right path just yet, because 4 of your 5 starters from last season are coming back. Yeah, you've gotten rid of DeRozan. Yes, you've gotten rid of Caruso. As those guys go out the door, so will a lot of wins because of that. But in a lot of respects, it does still feel very samey to me. Like, you still got Billy Donovan coaching the team. Arturis and Mark Eversley are still running the show. We obviously know that Reinsdorf is still owning the operation. A lot of the roster is the same roster that came back last season. Yes, there's been some key personnel gone out, but it still feels like a retool to me, not a rebuild. And maybe that's
5
semantics.
of your top 7 are still the same.
Yeah. Like, that is concerning to me. And the element that you need Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic to show out, at least in the early parts of this season or the upcoming season, just to get rid of them, that is all. There's an opportunity cost with that in terms of maybe we don't see a lot of Buzelis in the first 2 months of the season, assuming Patrick Williams starts, because Zach LaVine is now in the DeMar DeRozan role. And, even Patrick Williams, like a lot of people have talked about, now with the DeRozan gone, that Pat can step into more of those situations where DeMar was on ball. Well, will he? Are we sure about, like, has Patrick Williams' role changed at all? Like, you've brought in Josh Giddey, who is going to be on ball so many times because he needs to be. You've got Zach LaVine, who's going to be taking a lot of those DeMar DeRozan possessions. Zach barely played last season, so he's going to be taking a lot of those possessions. Kobe obviously blossomed into something real last season. He doesn't want to see his role diminish. You've got Vooch in there who needs his touches. Pat is still the 5th guy on this starting lineup. If Pat is there, like, where is Buzelis playing? Probably not as much as some Bulls fans want to see him play. So, like, I don't know. There's a lot of opportunity costs with these guys being on the roster. Those guys being Vucevic and LaVine. You need to give them touches. You need to give them time to get rid of them. And if you're giving time to them, then potentially they're worsening your draft pick, because maybe you're picking up 1, 2, 3, 5 egregious wins that you don't necessarily want to in the tank race, much like the Bulls did in 2017.
Those really matter. Those really matter.
Yeah.
We've seen how those can impact the
Yeah,
long term,
exactly.
not just this season, but like 3 wins in 2017 cost the Bulls Luka Doncic, which cost them this entire last 3 years. I mean, I wonder, like, if, it's hard because, like, they still haven't completely changed course yet, but like, it wasn't even worth it to trade for DeMar and Lonzo and Caruso and Vooch, or would it have been better to just stay the course? Like, to me, probably the latter. I don't see the value in these seasons where you're just like fighting for the middle. And, like, the invention of the play-in tournament, I think, changed some things and made it a little bit more palatable than it would have been. I mean, certainly finishing 9th and 10th the last two years without a play-in tournament would have been a complete disaster, even more than it already was. But yeah, I just wonder, like, I think we're kind of espousing the same point, which is that it seems like the Bulls are still on this path because they haven't committed one way or the other. It's why they weren't able to, ever break out of the middle when they had the opportunities to maybe trade future picks and Patrick Williams to go get guys that would have helped when they were at the top of these standings. And it's why they don't have a great core to build forward with now that they have finally moved on from some of their guys. What do you think they need to do in order to get off of this, like, treadmill where they're between, like, the 5th worst to 15th worst team in the league? I mean, that's really where they've been the last 10 years now. And I just feel like unless you really commit to one path or another, it's hard to break off of that. And I think they have angled more towards one side of that, but it's still within that same lane. And I just don't know if they've done enough. It's possible, like I said, they've opened up more avenues where that's feasible, but I just don't know that they've really given themselves a way out.
No, like, this feels very baby Bulls to me, in the sense, like, I feel like I'm back in 2004, 2005, where, you can put together Josh Giddey, Kobe White, Io, Matas, Patrick Williams. It feels very samey to that period, in the sense that you've got this good collection of talent that if you put together and if they play hard and get the most out of themselves, that you could potentially be a 45 to 47 win team with that group as a whole. Have a good 3 to 4 year a fun window with those guys, but thereafter, where is it ultimately going? Like, that's where things feel like they're going currently. I think for the Bulls to break out of that, let alone just staying in the middle, they needed to commit to what we were talking about before, like treating this as a actual real rebuild. And I'm not convinced that they've done that just yet. And I think the Giddey deal, coming back to that, sort of signals that the fact that they prioritized guys that are already in the league, someone who can maybe stabilize the then and now, rather than thinking about where things might be in 2030. I'm not convinced that they really want to drop off that far. Like I don't know if they really want to get into the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. Like that might be a nice alternative, something that they would obviously welcome. But is that their primary goal right now? I'm not necessarily convinced about that. And I don't think they are doing everything they possibly can to ensure that they get their hands on Cooper Flag. Now, again, there's the lottery element to it all. You can't control everything. But if I'm looking at Brooklyn or Washington or some of these other teams in the Eastern Conference, Utah might enter that picture as well if they move Lowry and get a haul to do so. Those teams, I think, are more serious about putting themselves on the real or the right path in terms of championship stakes. I'm not convinced the Bulls are thinking about this, because why would they think it? Why would I think that? They haven't done that for the last 25 to 30 years. So there's no reason for me to think that now. And I think in their actions, I haven't necessarily seen that. But they also have their hands tied in some respects. Like the Brooklyn Nets, they pivoted from whatever they were doing, which was the right decision for them. They've gone into their draft. They got back their draft picks. They're prioritizing the Cooper Flag draft. But they were actually able to get assets back for their guy that they sent out in Mikal Bridges. The same will be true with Utah if they commit to trading Lowry. Like they can enter the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, but can get a haul back to do so. Whereas the Bulls, as we just spoke about, like they're needing to bring back Vooch and Levine, it seems like, and they need to sell Vooch and Levine that, let's play some decent basketball for the first few months and let's try to all be positive and try to get you out of here on a positive note in that sense. Like the Bulls, when they get rid of those guys, we talked about, trading first round picks to get rid of Zach LaVine. It's the inverse of what's happening in Brooklyn and Utah in a lot of respects. So I do think they're on a better path than obviously what they were on. I still don't think it's a good path or the right path or the complete path that they should be on. It feels very Bullsian in that sense. And I understand why Bulls fans are optimistic now. And I'm not here, obviously, to rain on their parade. And, I'm obviously not on the podcast weekly to do so anyway. So allow me this one opportunity, people, to talk my nonsense. But I'm still not enthused ultimately where this thing is going. I still think it needs a lot of luck, more so than other teams who are probably engineering their luck or engineering the possibility of having more luck than what the Bulls are.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, because I think the Bulls are kind of trying to walk this line of like, well, maybe we get into the play-in or the playoffs and it's because things worked out well and the young players are good. Or maybe we're, exciting and young, but we weren't quite good enough, but now we at least get to keep our pick. And I think there are enough teams at the bottom that are like, we're keeping our pick. We're going to the bottom. We're in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, that unless you get lottery luck, and who knows, that could happen, but unless you're maximizing your chances of getting the right amount of luck, then you're going to probably end up somewhere in the like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 range, as opposed to the top 5 or in the playoffs. And when that happens, now you have just as much of a chance to give up your pick as you have to keep it. And even if you do keep it, it's probably going to be for another non-franchise changing player. And I ultimately, as I've said before, that is the single most important thing that teams need to do. That should be the guiding light for every front office, is like, we have our guy and we are building around him, or we are searching for our guy. And so ultimately, I believe that building through the middle doesn't work. I think you need to pick a lane. You need to go to the bottom or the top, even without flattening of the lottery odds, even with teams getting lucky. I still think that's the case, because you need to give yourself chances. And again, you're limiting downside exposure. When you pick up those extra couple of wins, it costs you Luka Doncic, and it costs you this last 6 years of being in the middle in some form or fashion. So, as I said before, like I don't want to get too down, because in general, I'm happy with the direction that they've taken. Like I do think that they are much better off for the future now than they were 6 months ago at the trade deadline. Certainly, I mean, they at least have younger players they can build with. We'll see about how all the details like actually work out, what contracts Giddey gets. Are you able to bring back Kobe and Io using cap space, because they've outplayed what their extension numbers are going to be? There's a lot of questions, and I don't think they're all going to get answered this year, but my hope is that by the end of it, you can start to see a little bit more of a clear, like, vision or pathway towards whatever it is that you're trying to build. So Mark, this has been a lot of fun. I hope that over the coming months and seasons, you will find some time to come join me again, because I love talking ball with you. It's great to have you back.
I missed you, William. I missed you, young Spathis. I made the right decision for myself, let's say, but and I knew it was always going to be hard to what's the name, not turn up weekly and have this conversation, or have this vehicle to have a conversation with you just about basketball. I mean, yeah, look, I won't go on an emotional rant. I'll save it, but it has been fun being able to reconnect with you again, William. I miss it a lot. I don't miss the Bulls, but I miss talking to you a lot. So, and to Matt and Dave as well. Like I'm not really a Bulls fan anymore in the same capacity that I was previously, but I still listen to you guys every day. I haven't given up in that regard. And maybe that's how I'll always remain connected to the Bulls, is just by supporting my friends and seeing the good things that you guys are doing. So I'm glad to see that is the case. The podcast is growing. It's getting bigger. You guys are great. I still tune in every day, like I said. Your podcasts keep me fueled when I'm walking the dogs and playing with my kids. So keep doing what you guys are doing, and I'll always be listening.
Well, we appreciate it. We love you. We miss you. And we hope to talk to you soon. We are going to be back next week for more off-season coverage. Matt and Dave will be back. I will be back. But Mark, always great to talk with you. Joey, we appreciate it. Until next time, thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.